hi everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the AI Adoption Playbook. Today I'm here with Alex Page from BigPanda, who's the principal AI architect there. Alex, do you want to give a quick intro into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Like you said, Alex Page over at Big Panda. Been here for about 4 or 5 years. And yeah, my title is Principal AI Architect. I feel like I wear kind of a lot of hats, and what I do today is like very different from what I joined Big Panda to do. But yeah, I actually came up just knowing I love computers, got into programming kind of young. And out of college, that's, my first job was a software developer role. Then I sort of had this epiphany that it might be interesting to sell software versus build it. And I sort of moved into sales engineering, doing software demos and running POVs. So I did that at CA and Broadcom, and then moved over to Big Panda to do the same thing. But I started developing a lot of opinions about what our customers were sort of still challenged with. And, then that one magical November, ChatGPT came out, and it sort of just opened my eyes to this new world of possibility. And it was very exciting, and it still is today. So I sort of started prototyping stuff, one of which kind of gained some traction and kind of presented it internally. We started making it available to customers to try. This is kind of early days LLM usage, but I'd say it worked well enough.
When
And
did you
then
guys ship the first prototype that a customer was trying to use?
yeah, so it was November 2023. ChatGPT came out. Then a couple months later, I was working on this prototype to basically explain very cryptic IT incidents, which we'll say are collections of alerts in plain human language. Like, this is what's happening, this is what's impacted, etc. And maybe a month or two after that, we enlisted some design partners, some of our awesome customers, to give it a go. They said it was super helpful. And then I think a month and a half after that, we went GA. And then at that point, our chief innovation officer said, "Hey, do you want to make a full-time job out of this?" And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And it's that then there was sort of a journey from there till what I'm doing today. But yeah, that's sort of the transition from
Yeah.
sales engineering to what I do now.
So tell me a little bit about the types of incidents that, you guys are sort of helping with here. What exactly is the nature of the incident? What exactly is the nature of the agent? And how does it help with those incidents?
Yeah. So that first prototype was sort of the eye-opening moment. And then from there, really just started sinking my teeth into, yes, LLMs, but then pretty quickly agents and more complex kind of LLM driven applications, moving from just analyzing information to, things like RAG, eventually, interfacing agentically with external systems, and then moving to actual.
What are the types of systems that you guys are interfacing with?
Yeah, so the whole idea around Big Panda and sort of our core product that we've had for some years is that the IT operations as a whole is just sort of fragmented by nature, even in terms of just tooling, right? We work with most of the larger organizations, and it's not uncommon to have 10, 20, I think I've even heard of 30 different monitoring tools. So if you're in IT operations, you're responsible for keeping things online, responding to alerts about, infrastructure, application, really all layers of the stack.
Are these
It's very over.
alerts like, your SIEM, your SOAR? Like, what are the specific systems that we're looking at here?
Yeah, it's like infrastructure assets like servers, VMs, applications, containers, databases, starting to have issues. It's sort of like when you try to go check out on Amazon and it says, "Oops, sorry, we had an issue." There's alerts, probably many alerts firing when that happens, and someone and teams of people are trying to respond to that and fix it. So our whole approach is, you will have all of these tools, right? And the reason is, some are really good at monitoring this part of the stack versus this other part of the stack. Let's be the thing that will bring everything together, make sense of it, correlate, and give you more actionable presentation of incidents so that you can, fix them faster ultimately.
Yeah, super
Um,
interesting. Now, I noticed on your website, like, you sort of focus on the IT persona, but obviously when like the Amazon shopping cart goes down, like there's a lot of engineers that are sort of responding to that as well. Help me get a little bit of a sense of like, are you guys mostly focused on helping out with these engineering incidents? Is it more like security incidences? Like, what is the span of things?
yeah, I would say it's less focused on security. There's really specialized tools for like security type incidents. We're more on the kind of I wouldn't say traditional, but for lack of a better term, traditional IT operations, which is systems, applications having issues. And a lot of the, like to your point with engineering, a lot of issues are actually, are caused by some sort of change, whether that's a change to infrastructure or a code change that was deployed that introduced an issue. So we do it sort of bleeds into ITSM, right? As far as, what changes have been introduced in the environment. So there's a level of not just correlating alerts together that are related, but also discovering, well, was there a recent change that might be causing this particular incident?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, apologies for the really obtuse question here, but like in my very primitive understanding, ITSM is typically associated with like, the basic level. It might be something like, hey, I'm like locked out of my computer,
Right.
or I need access to this business application.
Yeah.
Um, is that the kind of thing that you're talking about, or is it more like, hey, this application is down and like, what do we do about it?
Yeah. So at least a lot of the major organizations, they're sort of using ITSM to handle both of those things. So there's your more help desk, internal or even external, but like, hey, I need a password reset kind of thing, or I need access to this system. But we're more focused on the sort of incident and change type of records that are also stored in ITSM, right? So if there's a major outage, there's at least one, maybe many incidents that are created to track that and what's impacted. What are we doing to fix it? And so typically as like a source of truth, that information will end up in ITSM.
Cool, got it. And so these outages might be of third-party SaaS vendors that you depend on, like if your Salesforce goes down, or is it more like if your core product application that you're like serving to your customers goes down, or both?
So both. And really that's the like kind of starts to illustrate the problem, right? Is there are so many potential causes for these things. And we're talking about major companies, highly distributed, and yes, it depended on external services from cloud providers to, things like Salesforce or even networking. Work with a lot of companies that deal with incidents related to ISPs cutting a local fiber line, which cut, connectivity to their data center in Oklahoma, right? Like it's everything under the sun, and that's really part of the problem.
Wow. Okay. Really, really, really cool. So tell me a little bit about. We'll get into the details of Biggie and what you guys built there. It sounds really, really interesting. I can't wait to hear more about it. I'd love to just start off with a little bit of like, you mentioned your sort of ChatGPT moment in November 2023. Like, tell me about that. Like, how did you hear about ChatGPT? What did you start using it for? Like, how has your usage of it evolved over time, both like at work and then also just generally in your life?
Yeah, so, it first came out, it was kind of in the tech headlines, so to speak. So I remember trying it for a few kind of basic things. Just, I'm sure my first query was something like, "Hey, how are you?" or something like that, right? Um,
Yeah, I wish I could remember my first ChatGPT question.
yeah,
It was something really stupid, like, "Write me a poem for so and
yeah,
so."
right, right. And then very shortly after that, we had like a company-wide event, a sales kickoff, and one of my coworkers pulled up, he had used it. He had like kind of dummied up some like fake alert data, kind of similar to the data our platform deals with, and sent it in and said, "Hey, make sense of this or find the root cause based on the alerts." And it was like surprisingly good. And this is, I don't know, GPT 3.5 back in the day, right? And so then from there, it sort of got the wheels spinning like, oh, I could use this for work. This isn't just a toy. And then, as they say, the rest is history. But it just sort of like very quickly became evident that this is, even in that state back then, which feels like a lifetime ago, is such an unlocking and powerful technology. And I'm not, I don't come from like an ML background, right? And I think that is probably understated as far as like it used to be. And I was in software development for a while, and ML was sort of this like special class that, there was a lot of PhDs there, and like it was kind of inaccessible. You got to read a lot of books. Otherwise, like you're doing, functional programming basically, right? So this is completely different. You don't need to really know any of that to get going, at least. And I'd say it has different things. You have different considerations, and for example, prompt engineering, right? But it's just so accessible, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in it or maybe has dabbled to really, give it a chance to dive deep and see what's possible, because it was surprising to me how quickly you could get something actually useful built with really virtually no traditional ML experience.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal, actually. I've never seen any technology like it, like,
Yeah.
truly in my lifetime. Even like, I remember when Google search came out and it just felt so like beautifully simple and straightforward at the time. Like today it feels like a nightmare, but back then it felt like beautifully simple and straightforward. It's just a
Yeah.
simple little box. You type in a question and you get a bunch of links back. And yet, like, for technology as simple as that, it still took a really long time for, like, for example, my parents to feel comfortable using it, right? But
Yep.
somehow, like, my parents and my wife's parents
Yep.
are on ChatGPT, like, all the time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, yeah, they're, like, super comfortable talking to it, and it's phenomenal to see. It's, like, really, really cool to witness a technology just explode into every corner of society. Talk about the enterprise, right? Like, it took so long for cloud applications to penetrate like the enterprise, right? Like there was so much resistance. And yet today, AI is like there isn't like a Fortune 500 company that isn't using AI. Like they're all using it. The federal government's using it. Like it's phenomenal to see, and it's partly kind of what you're saying that accessibility is just so awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So then tell me a little bit about Biggy. What are you guys building with Biggy, and like how did you guys come to Biggy as their like right thing to build?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. Again, with Big Panda as a company, we already have a ton of great customers, mostly the larger organizations.
Cool. What kinds of
And
companies to come out?
so we've got everything from ICE, which runs the New York Stock Exchange, to Workday. I'm trying to think like which customers I can actually name or not, but I'm sure there's a bunch on our website. It's largely Fortune 500, and that's really the problems we're trying to solve. Not that they don't apply to smaller companies, but they're just very painful. The pain of these problems scales with the size of the organization and the complexity. So it's yeah.
I
Um,
think I saw PlayStation on
yep,
your website.
PlayStation.
I was like a huge fan of PlayStation, or at least I was as a kid. I wish I still had time to be a huge fan, but definitely a really cool logo.
Yeah, it's when I was in sales engineering before Big Panda, the gaming industry was not maybe well represented in the software at least that I was selling back then. But IT operations is a very critical piece of really any company, but gaming especially because I don't know if you just check Twitter whenever there's an online game having issues. The gamers are very open about disappointment. So, but anyway, so we have a lot of great customers, and this is sort of after that initial prototype was in production, and then I started kind of hitting the research books with, and when I say research books, I mean primarily YouTube and certain dev blogs about agents, and so there was some experimentation going on our end with how viable are these, and this is now GPT-4 or maybe GPT-4 Turbo era, right? So we've come a long way since then, but even then it was showing promise. Started doing a lot with RAG and different kind of context retrieval, because that's a huge thing with organizations we work with. Like if they go onto ChatGPT and say, "Hey, help me with this issue on this server affecting this application," it's not going to give a great answer. It doesn't have any knowledge of their proprietary information, topology, incident history, etc. So we started experimenting with RAG, and right around the same time, talking with different customers like, "Hey, this is what we're thinking about." And one of them said, "Well, can we do that tomorrow?" And our response was sort of, "Well, do you have the data? Are you willing to give us this data? This is, net new data that we haven't asked for before." And they said, "Yeah, I can give it to you tomorrow." And sort of prototyped with the customer, like hand in hand for a month, got to a state where they felt comfortable releasing to their immediate teams, and then just iterated, and a year and a half later have not stopped iterating. We now have, we enlisted 4 or 5 more design partners since then. We now have customers that are actively using it as a critical piece of their, operations. So I think, I've been in the sales engineering world for a while, and it always kind of perplexed me the lack of speed or in some cases resistance to listening to your customers, right? They bought your software because it solves a problem for them. But now there's a relationship, and you're going to naturally learn of the other problems that are definitely relevant to what you're selling, but maybe your product doesn't address. And that should be like a a very loud voice that is echoed across the organization down through PM and engineering. And I know, everyone has the concept of feature requests, but it doesn't seem like there's a tight enough loop there. Not every, not all the time and not in every case, but in a lot of cases, your customers can guide you to like a very incredibly powerful product.
I'd love to know a little bit more about that. So, like, what are some examples on Biggie where those like early design partners change your direction or like made you rethink what the product should do or how it should be?
Yeah. So one of the first use cases we tackled with Biggie was, all right, we've got all this organizational history and context loaded. The users in chat, we make Biggie available in chat, want to be able to say, hey, I'm dealing with this issue. Help me resolve it. And then what it will do is look through all of your history. And because a lot of issues repeat themselves, and it'll say, oh, Nginx 500 errors on, whatever service. Here's where that's happened before. Here's what was done to resolve it. Great. So then the very next thing that this customer said was, this is awesome, but now that helped me and I worked the incident and now I've got to do this post-incident sort of artifact generation. I have to document what happened, how we fixed it. Could you do that too? Right. So then it just sort of like naturally like, all right, this is what I do first. And now I have to do this. And now I have to do this. And like, can you help me with all of those things? And so that's sort of one way that it kind of expanded in what it can do. But we quickly sort of went back to the drawing board when we realized we want this thing to kind of do a lot. So we sort of gave some thought into the architecture of how it should work and really how that impacts the user experience.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, like, obviously what you're saying about listening to your customers being so important is clearly, 100% true. I don't think any business can succeed without doing that really well. A lot of the time when I think about customer feedback, and obviously I have to think about this a lot because as the founder of a startup, you live or die by how well you listen to it. I sort of tend to bucket our feedback into kind of two primary categories, maybe three. Category three, which is kind of important to listen to, but it's kind of paper cut feedback, as we call it. Like, oh, like this like aspect of the product is a little slow, or I would love
Hmm.
it button was like over here, that kind of thing. And that's like helpful to address because it helps generate the kind of customer trust in the idea that you're like listening to their feedback at all, right? And then that kind of gets you to like level two, which is the sort of it's not necessarily like direct feedback about the product, but it's a clue for like what maybe your team should build. So, that kind of thing that you talked about around, okay, what's like missing, or like, this is what my workflow looks like today, and you guys are like doing a great
Hmm.
job solving that. But actually, not feedback really directly about your product at all, but like the next thing I do after I use your product is I do this, and I like hate doing that, right?
Hmm.
That's sort of interesting as like a clue into what to build. And then I think there's a third category that falls like, outside of the scope of the previous two, which is more like subtle, nuanced stuff about like the way the product should function. So, like a simple example of this for us is like, okay, well, a lot of our customers, when they're interacting with their internal data in Creedle, will want to be able to ask things like, okay, what are all of the updates on, customer X in the last like, 3 weeks, right? And that sort of question of like which documents and which sources and which updates around the company's data systems like sort of, are related to or relate to customer X is not something that's like necessarily stored super clearly. And so
Hmm.
there's a nuanced thing of like, okay, you probably have to build a knowledge graph to be able to do this really well. And like, you have to extract the entities of like the customer, and the customer is an important entity, but maybe there's like 10 or 12 other important entities that you need to like have a conception on. I'm super interested for you, like, what are some of those nuanced, subtle, like, it's not directly obvious from what the customer is saying, but you can kind of tease out what you need to change about your product from what the customer is telling you. Like, what are some examples of that you guys have had on Biggie?
Yeah, so there was sort of a moment where there was a lot of focus on kind of problem management, which the whole purpose of that is like let's take a step back and what are the recurring issues? How can we kind of permanently address process or system stability to really prevent incidents or at least reduce them, right? And so a lot of problem management is having that bird's eye view.
Yeah.
And, you know, while back then you could ask Biggie like, hey, what are some trends in all of the incidents for the past 6 months? you know, if that's just if all you have is sort of basic RAG, like, semantic search, you're not going to get a great answer, right? To your point. So we sort of realized, like, yeah, we do want semantic search for many things, but for other things, we need an entirely different approach. So it's one thing if it's sort of completely unstructured data, start to finish, and you want to do like named entity recognition, and probably knowledge graph is a great place to store that. But a lot of the questions that we were kind of focused on answering, the answers actually resided in ITSM. So like the ServiceNows, the Jiras of the world. And so our approach was, okay, so let's build agentic integrations with these systems. And by that I mean like a source specific agent that is efficient at traversing various APIs and kind of works until it's done. It can do sequences of calls and kind of reason. And, so that sort of was the initial approach there. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, like it started with an initial set of use cases. These started expanding. Our approach to have some level of determinism was the questions we get are interpreted as far as what the intent of the user is. And then that's sort of cross-referenced with what are the available capabilities of Biggy. And so there's an element of routing to what we call action plans. Once you get to an action plan, there could be 1 to 10 LLM calls within that action plan, but there is a level of determinism so that we don't go off the rails. And there's also an incorporation of any, organization defined preferences as far as how those should work and configurations. But yeah, so to your actual question, I'd say maybe in a way, lucky for us, the answers did reside in different systems, but was it not so immediately obvious how to use those systems directly. And so we sort of simplified that with the agentic integrations that we built.
Really, really interesting. Yeah, very cool. And so when you were going about, building Biggie, one of the things I hear a lot from folks is it can be really tricky sometimes to think through and get right. Like, how do you evaluate and control like whether your system is working or not, right? If you're building an agentic system that's going to take an action in ServiceNow, how do you know that the ticket it created was the right ticket, that it, came to the right conclusion, that it, sort of filled out all of the form fields on that ticket correctly? Like, how does that work for you guys internally as you build Biggie, and what approaches have you taken to like ensure the quality of your agent?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably talk about this topic alone for an hour, and it is it's been top of mind since the beginning. It's still top of mind. I don't think as an industry it's been fully solved as far as how to monitor, even just monitor the performance or accuracy of an LLM application. And we have evals, and that I'd say that has come a long way. But even then, I mean, I remember some early uses of evals on not, it was a singular LLM call to summarize an incident, right? The first thing I spoke of. Well, is the summary accurate, right? I mean, that's subjective. Was the summary too long, too wordy, right? Like, sometimes yes, sometimes no, but I might disagree. Like, so even evals are not a silver bullet. I think it's a combination of things, and I won't say that we've arrived at an answer to the whole thing, but I think feedback's important. So you can kind of democratize it to a bit on a per user kind of query result basis, where if it didn't do the right thing, give them an opportunity to tell you that. But I feel pretty strongly that if you're going to do that, then there needs to be something that happens as a result of that, or quickly they will stop doing that, right? So if it's clear to them that it is teaching, the system by leaving feedback, then they're obviously incentivized to do it. But the inverse is equally true. So, and that's been a whole kind of tricky thing to figure out how to do. We've started to do some interesting things there that are definitely gaining traction. But that's with these LLMs, like it's an AI model, just train it. And it's not really, you can't think of it like that. Yes, you can fine tune them, but that's more like, correcting tone. It's not necessarily walking it through how to perform a certain task the right way under these certain conditions. It's a little trickier.
So tell me about that. I mean, I think that's exactly right, right? I think that's extremely tricky, and it's one of the hardest things about this. If you're not like actually building the foundation models yourself, there's a limit to what you have available to you in terms of things you could do to like improve the performance. Like, what are the levers that you guys are using to try and improve the performance of these agents? And then, like, how are you actually taking user feedback? What is the user feedback, by the way? Like, is it thumbs up, thumbs down? Is there more to it than that? And then how do you translate that into like improvements in the agentic behavior overall?
Sure. Yeah. So initially it was thumbs up, thumbs down. You can leave free text, whatever, what you didn't like, what went wrong. As we moved more towards like true agents and teams of agents and hierarchies of agents, then it's what we're doing now, or we'll be doing very soon, is giving you visibility into the steps that the agent performed, and it's almost drag and drop. Like, well, no, you shouldn't have done this first. You should have done that first, or you shouldn't have done that at all. It's thinking in terms of agents, right? Because that's just front and center these days. It's like, if it does something wrong, then, well, let's break that down. An agent is just, some entity that has access to tools, and it's making tool calls, providing inputs, interpreting the outputs, and then deciding if it should call the next tool or if it's done, right? So if it does something wrong, then it either called the wrong tool, or it performed the wrong sequence, or the inputs to the tool was incorrect, et cetera, largely. So again, giving visibility to the users on what it did in a way that they'll understand, and then can easily spot, like, oh yeah, that was where you messed up. Okay, great. Let's say I can record that, but now what? Right? That's the tricky part. So some things that we've explored is or are the kind of encoding of those corrections, sort of like just embedding those essentially in a vector database, kind of side by side with all the organizational history and context. But for this particular thing, it's going to be used whenever an agent starts up. Hey, do I have any semantically similar queries to what I'm being asked to do now? Oh, I do. Oh, and this one they said thumbs up. I did it perfectly. What were the steps I performed? Oh, well, this one, it was a thumbs down. I did this when I should have done that. And so you sort of give that information to the agent to influence its decision making. Is, I'd say, one approach, and so far seems to be working quite well. But I wouldn't claim that, again, that we've fully cracked the nut. And that's sort of the fun part, is you kind of feel like, there's people much smarter than I coming out with papers all the time, which I do, try to stay on top of and read, which is hard. But you sort of feel like you're on the frontier a little bit, at least right now, with figuring this stuff out. And to me, that's exciting.
Yep. Okay, awesome. Somehow we're already coming up on time now, which is crazy. But this was a really, really fun chat. I really enjoyed it. And just to round out with a couple of fun questions for you. When do you think AI will replace your job?
It's I'm guessing you asked this to everybody on your
True
podcast
that.
lately. Yeah, I don't know, but I think whenever it does replace what I'm doing right now, then I will definitely be doing something else. I don't think that I'll be out of a job, because I don't know. I'm a big believer that it will be a long time before kind of having drive, initiative, that sort of go-getter mentality will not be useful. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm actually more excited than anything to see, how this changed, and I hope it's largely for the better. But yeah, I wouldn't say I'm too worried about that. It doesn't keep me up at night.
Okay, well, that's obviously good to hear. One of the things I'm a little bit curious about is like when you think about that question, like when will AI replace your job? Like, what do you think are the things in between, like where we are today and it being able to be the principal AI architect at Big Panda? So you mentioned a little bit of like sort of driving initiative, taking sort of capabilities. What does that mean in practice? How much of that is a research problem? How much of that is an engineering problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, how do I know what, or at least I think I know what the next thing is we should do in Biggy, or how we should improve Biggy, right? It's because I know the system, I use the system, we dog food the product, so our SRE teams use it internally. Our customers are using it. I'm in touch with our customers. So it's all this sensory data that influences like what I think we should do next. And an LLM by itself has access to none of that. So, okay, can we kind of rag any of that? Probably, yeah. And you've got things like Gong that are recording calls that we're having with our customers. But I think before an AI can truly replace a job like this, I'll say, it needs to be able to understand or take in all those sensory inputs that we as humans take in with our ears and our eyes. And there's a big gap there, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, that I think that's like a really, really interesting insight. Like obviously the research model, the foundation models, the research labs are pushing really hard at increasing the multimodality. So like the level of sensory input into the models like should be going up. But I think there's still a very, very big gap from what I've interpreted about like a human's ability to understand and reason about conversation versus an AI's ability. I saw this really recently when, I was in a call. We're actually using Gong to record that call, and I asked the customer something like about some idea, and they were like, you know, they thought about it and they're like, well, yeah. And I could kind of tell from their response that they like didn't really think it was a good idea, but they were just sort of being polite. And I remember the Gong summary afterwards of the call was like, the customer thought this was a really good idea, right? And it's totally easy to understand like why the AI thought that, but a human would never have made that mistake, or at least a human with like basic levels of like social interaction
Right.
understanding would
Right.
never have understood that. And
Yeah.
it's a great example of like how much nuance there is in human communication and like how much work we have to do on the models to really get them to understand all of that very deeply.
Right. And then the question of, well, even if we could, would I want some neural link that's like, processing and using it at everything I see and hear, including with my family and everything else to improve some AI model? That's a whole nother debate. But yeah, I think to me, that's kind of the biggest gap between us getting replaced, as a whole.
Right. Yeah. It's just the like sheer volume and complexity of our ability to absorb and synthesize information. Like
Yep.
LLMs obviously can absorb an enormous amount of information, but it's all very well, the biggest amount of it is like batch processed in these like big training jobs, I guess. And then
Right.
you like continually feed and continually string new information to them is much harder.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. This was really, really fun chatting. Before we go, is there anything that you want, the audience to check out or listen to, or, how can they find out more about Biggy and what you guys are up to at Big Panda?
Yeah, BigPanda.io is our website. There's information about, our event management system as well as Biggy on there. Some exciting videos. Yeah, we love working with our customers and bringing on new customers. So happy to get in touch. And I like talking to people. So outside of work or anything like that, happy to connect on LinkedIn. I should be easy to find, Alexander Page. But yeah, I want to thank you for bringing me on. It's been fun.
Yeah, awesome. Alex, really, really fun. Thank you very much. And hopefully we get to have you back on sometime.
All right, sounds good.